China,
Taiwan-China,
Taiwan.
Europe is just delaying making hard choices.
It's hard for businesses to give up on this kind of money-making machine.
I think people really probably underestimate the kind of catastrophic effects.
Hey, and welcome to The Dip. Today we are looking to the horizon because there might be a perfect storm brewing for Europe, which is, what if China invaded Taiwan?
And that's not only a political issue or military issue, but it's also a big economic one, actually.
Exactly. And we're all wondering, of course, how big is it? According to some figures, such military aggression could actually wipe $2 trillion, not just $1 trillion, $2 trillion off of the European economy.
And $2 trillion feels like insane.
Yeah.
And so I'm really happy that we've got two experts lined up to go deep dive on this one. First up is Simona Grano. She's head of research for China and Taiwan relations at the University of Zurich. And she also advises the Swiss government on how to, deal with the tension over there. And also down the line, we've got Andrew Fang, our colleague from Taipei. Hey, Andrew.
Hi, guys.
And Andrew, we're actually going to start with you. Something I always wonder whenever we see headlines about China here out of Berlin is the potential for conflict real, or is this just classic Western fear-mongering?
So it's very real. It's definitely not fear-mongering. So, in the past decades, we've seen it's roughly the time when Chinese President Xi Jinping took power. In the past decades, we've seen China's PLA, People's Liberation Army, has heightened its coercion around Taiwan. So for example, the latest figure I can get is from Wednesday, actually. So on Wednesday, Taiwan's government, Taiwan's army, we detected 11 PLA aircraft and 9 PLA ships. So it's happening every day in daily basis, and those are part of it. Salami slicing tactics to try to wear out Taiwan and Taiwan's allies, partners' awareness and making people getting really used to it. But I think what's changed starting this year is that we see Chinese President Xi Jinping is trying to pivot and trying to form, trying to position Beijing government as a peacemaker. So actually, before the Trump-Xi talk, we know that Xi Jinping saying that, the so-called Taiwan problem is the core discussion between U.S. and China. But before that, in April, actually, Xi Jinping met Taiwan's opposition party leader, Zheng Liwen, in Beijing in April. So I think we've seen Beijing is trying to become, they're used to, it's sort of a carrot and stick, right? So we know that POA is capable of invading. They try to do this in 2027, but now they are trying to showcase that they can talk peace. So we make people know that we have a stick, and this military coercion can happen. But also, if you are willing to talk peace, we can talk peace. So I think that's what's changing now. But what hasn't changed is that it's happening on a daily basis. This kind of harassment and coercion over Taiwan, and it's happening every day. So it's very true, actually.
So like a very visible conflict that you have happening over there. Simona, Taiwan and China, they both do a lot of business with the EU, but both are a bit different in their approach, let's say. How do they differ, like China and Taiwan in trade relations with the EU?
I think it depends a little bit, right, on what we are talking about, because, of course, both are extremely important for Europe, but in a different manner. Of course, we know that Taiwan is especially important for semiconductors, although I think that's a bit reductionist in the sense that for the EU, of course, what's important is also the maritime routes around Taiwan. We know that and the estimates are a bit, of course, difficult on that front, but they say about between 50 and 60% of global container ships go through the strait. And it's not just, the European economy that is dependent on that part of the world remaining open, but it's also countries in the area that are like Japan, for example, or even the Philippines that are really worried about what is going on. What we just heard also, the military intimidations is something that is prompting other countries in the area. Something that happened a few days ago is really also that Japan and the Philippines started to talk about monitoring together what China is doing, because they also have contested islands with China as well. And so I think semiconductors dependence for Europe specifically and the whole world, we know that, the most advanced ones, the very small ones, about 92% come out of the island of Taiwan. So how can you substitute that? But it's really also about remaining sure that the lanes and the maritime routes, which are important for the whole world, look at the Strait of Hormuz when that is closed, remain open. And also, I think in military strategic senses, it's also important for the United States that the island of Taiwan never falls under China, because then they would have, of course, basically a free entry into the Pacific.
Andrew, if you look at the numbers, the EU trades a lot more with China than it does with Taiwan. So looking at the numbers, it seems to be the more important partner. Do you agree with that assessment, looking at Taiwan?
I think that's true because just look at the data. EU and China, they're each other's second largest trading partners. But meanwhile, Taiwan is EU's 13th largest, and EU is Taiwan's fourth largest, and the EU became the the fourth largest just last year. And it's something, but what's also happening is that in 2025, US surpassed China, became the first largest trading partner of Taiwan. So I think what we've seen, the Taiwanese government, we used to be, and also the Taiwanese industry, we used to highly rely on factories in China and rely on the trading between across the Taiwan Strait. But we've seen the risk in the past decades. Taiwanese government have seen it's dangerous to super rely on China because it's something highly, connected to the geopolitical the risks. So I think what the Taiwanese government trying to do right now is to do more business with any other partners, other than China. And people are really focusing on the U.S. before, but since Donald Trump came to the power, in the U.S., and people have seen that the current White House can change the policy just a snap, and it's something. It's an uncertainty nobody wants to see, especially the Taiwanese investors. So we've seen that Taiwanese investors are trying to, invest more to EU, to European countries. And that's something happening right now. And I think it's also important to really diversify. And by diversify, not only to, diversify, getting away from the reliance on China, but also, although the U.S. is Taiwan's main, security partner, but we also cannot only rely on the U.S. We have to diversify, with European nations, European countries. And meanwhile, it's pretty hard to make the EU as a union to, make some decision, make some big deal with Taiwan. So I think the Taiwanese government is trying to do right now is to build up, one-on-one relation. So it's uncertain. European countries would try to make business, try to make more deal and more highly officials visit between the two countries. So I think that's what the Taiwanese government doing right now. It's slow, and compared to what China have right now, and the volume, it's lower. It's weaker, but I think the Taiwan is trying to diversify, and it's what they're doing right now.
So not putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, but unfortunately, I think the European basket might be made of red tape. But staying with Europe, Simona, I want to come to you. In my view, it really seems like Europe has been caught on the back foot when it comes to the economic consequences of military conflict, or say COVID, for example. But when we think about military conflict, of course, we have Trump in Iran, Putin, Ukraine. When we're talking about what could happen in the Strait of Taiwan, what do you see as the risks to Europe?
I think the risks to Europe are the ones that we mentioned before. I mean, it's the fact that I think people really probably underestimate the kind of catastrophic effects that we will get out of not only a kinetic conflict. You mentioned it before, that would be more or less minus 8 or 10% of global GDP. But even if we just had, I think it was first the Rhodium Group that calculated this in December 2022, only if there were to be a blockade of the island of Taiwan, that would also actually present cost of $2.5 trillion in annual losses. I mean, that is something that I think, especially in Europe, now that we are seeing, what it means to be dependent sometimes on energetic needs from authoritarian regimes like the Russian ones with the aggression war in Ukraine, we need to avoid at all costs. And I think that very often we are not aware enough of what it would mean if we had actually a potential conflict involving Taiwan, because that would be much worse than the COVID pandemic, than the 2008 financial crisis, and also that what is going on at the moment, as I said, with the Russian war of aggression towards Ukraine. So I think these kind of things need to be made much more present in the public. There was a Bloomberg report, I think, last week that really also calculated by country what that would mean, right? And I think it's useful for people to hear, because you cannot expect, unfortunately, everyone to care about Taiwan because it is a democracy. They should, especially because we are living through geopolitical phases in which we see that democracies can actually also not be that stable. So I personally think that a successful example like Taiwan should be protected and helped just because of that. But maybe the good way to go about it is also to let people understand that it would really touch them. It's something that would have an impact on their own personal interest, because it would touch their bank accounts. It would mean really global losses of a catastrophic proportion. And I think that this is something we don't really emphasize enough. And Europe has, in my opinion, particularly an advantageous position, because we are divided and there are 27 different voices. And these voices do not all perceive China as a threat in the same way, and do not all perceive Taiwan in the same way. But still, we got an economic weight. We are important for China. China at the moment has, of course, a business model that is mostly premised on its exports, has a problem because of the tariffs by Trump. And so it is dependent on the European market. And in my opinion, European countries don't do nearly enough that what they could do to actually use this weight to sometimes also really communicate to China that they should not change the status quo.
So many important points there that I want us to keep talking about. But you've alluded to this. Andrew also kind of mentioned how different countries within the EU are making relations with Taiwan, or Taiwan's reaching out to different nations within the EU. Let's break down some of those risks. Who, in your mind, Simona, is most exposed to any potential conflict in this region?
The Bloomberg report was talking about Germany. That would mean, minus 14% for them of the GDP. So, of course, Germany is one of those countries that is mostly affected. And I think Germany probably would have double shock because, of course, it's highly dependent also on, especially for its automotive sector, on China, right? So it's not just the shock that comes out of Taiwan if, semiconductors don't come out, but it's also, for those countries who have a high dependence, Switzerland is also one of them, from China. You need to understand that in that moment when China is enmeshed in a conflict, be this a kinetic one or not, it means that China cannot continue to do trade in the usual manner with this country. It also means that European countries, most probably, and the United States, would impose sanctions, would hamper, of course, the Chinese economy. So you are enmeshed from several shocks, right? And I think this is something that, going back to the first question you also asked when we talked about how likely is a war, I think that it's quite concerning certain actions that the Chinese are taking, and not just what Andrea was mentioning, of course, the military aggressive coercion measures that we see every day, but they are de facto really insulating their economy. They are stockpiling energy reserves. They are stockpiling gold. They are studying the Russian aggression in Ukraine to see how they can avoid SWIFT systems of banking payments so that they can insulate the fact of their economy in the case of a war. This doesn't mean that they will, of course, want to invade Taiwan tomorrow, but it is concerning because it means that they are trying to take all the measures in order to be ready for it, right?
Andrew, you already mentioned it, and I think when I researched this story, I was like, what? How is this possible? So China and Taiwan obviously have this complicated relationship, but there is still a massive amount of trade going on, a massive amount of investment between the two countries. What kind of goods and factories are being traded there?
So I think one of the main, you cannot believe this, one of the main product Taiwan export to China is IC, which is chips. So, there are some certain chips are banning from, export from Taiwan to China. Like there is a strategic high-tech commodities, under that there are 12 types of IC, products are limited. You cannot sell this to Chinese companies, and also you cannot sell this to Huawei or to certain Chinese company which are blacklisted. But other than that, the limits, compared to what the US doing right now, they are banning exporting AI chips to those high-end chips from US to China, including NVIDIA, and that's what the NVIDIA might be fighting for that. But compared to that, I think the limits current now, in Taiwan is much looser than what the U.S. have. And what's happening right now this week is that in Taiwan, Taiwanese government maybe get some pressure from the U.S. or maybe they just try to align with what U.S. is doing right now. So I think they're considering. It's also from the Bloomberg. They're considering to tighten its limits. So not just to Huawei, not just to certain companies, but to many, even every Chinese corporation. So it's something I think since they're considering, I think in the end they might be tightened up, maybe not to all Chinese companies, but to some more Chinese companies. So I think what we see is I think Taiwan's definitely trying to align their limits on exporting chips to China. And but overall, it's all about getting rid of the supply chain and to diversify the supply chain, or even not, diversify. The main goal is now to get away from their, Taiwan's reliance on China. The supply chain we can get as least as possible. I think it's the least is the safer to Taiwan. The least, related to China means that it's safer because now we're the one of the only country they are threatening Taiwan is China, right? So I think that's reasonable, but I think and it's also it date back to the old days when Taiwanese people still have those pro Beijing sentiment and believing it's good to do business with China. I think in the past decades, since Xi Jinping came power, Taiwanese people have seen it's not a good idea. We've seen the risk and we've seen how dictatorship might be really dangerous, not just for democracy like us, but also for business, right? For business, they're increasing risk all around the world, to Taiwan, to Europe, and also to the US.
One follow-up on that. So how do businesses view this? Oh, we want to move away from China a little bit, because obviously they are doing a lot of business with each other. So are businesses in general more like pro-China, or hey, let's keep the trade because we make a lot of money on it?
I think in the old days, people are, we see lots of business, especially those Taiwanese companies have factories in China, and those corporations, they used to pressure the government on, more friendly measures toward Chinese government because they want to do business. But I think pandemic, the COVID pandemic is one of those many multiple events that make people really see the risk of doing business with China, and so see the uncertainty of the Chinese regime. They can change their policy real quick, and it might be inhumane in a way. And I think what people and the business in Taiwan right now, they're seeing more opportunities to, other countries. We've seen, ever since Taiwan building up, try to boost their collaboration, especially with the U.S. or under certain big techs. For example, NVIDIA. It's we just finished the Computex right now. We've really see when you diversify the supply chain, it's actually good for business. It's actually good for not just in business as a leverage of Taiwan. Semiconductor as a leverage of Taiwan. It's worth it to sometimes to it might seem in the first, when TSMC building up factories all around the world, in our partners, allies in Japan, US, and Germany, it might, some people might see, is it decreasing the silicon shield of Taiwan? I think it's also diversifying the supply chain. Yeah.
Simona, yeah, please go ahead.
If I may interject a second to what Andrew was saying, I think one of the things that also is convincing many Taiwanese business persons to not to do business with China is really also China's behavior. We were mentioning the carrot and the stick approach, and we see that China uses that also towards different tycoons, in the sense that those who are aligned with the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, who is now in power in Taiwan, are usually targeted much more, of course, than the KMT business tycoon. But even those are actually not safe. So I think a good case is the one that we saw with Terry Gou, Foxconn, during the elections, who was running actually as a third incumbent to be elected as president of Taiwan. And during the, run up to the elections, actually China announced that there were problems with the land surrounding the Foxconn company in China, and slapped him basically with taxes fraud, right? It was an allegation, of course, which in the end made him drop out of the race. And everyone knew, although of course it wasn't really said out loud, that this was also because the CCP wanted to interfere. They wanted to make sure that he would not split the blue vote, which in the end happened anyway because there was no joint ticket between the opposition party and they lost. But I mean, this is also something that I think signals very clearly that also China friendly or more aligned, actually business tycoon can actually be at the whim of the CCP. And I think it's something that does not bode well. So it was really these changes also in trade relations between China and Taiwan is to be seen also in the light of the geopolitical changing context since Taiwan came along, and of course the CCP started to punish the party and of course Taiwan not to have tourist flows towards Taiwan, and that really also changed, I think, the attitude from the previous era of Ma Ying-jeou of the Taiwanese median voter of thinking, they're really trying to actually interfere with our daily life, including through business ties.
Simona, I want to use some of this interpretation now towards what China is actually doing, because I can't help but wonder if we're looking at this through a certain lens, that certain actions that we're seeing from China, the striving towards energy independence, for example, if that couldn't be seen as a way for the country to harden its economy ahead of some kind of kinetic action. What are you seeing?
I would definitely say that. As I said before, I think there are some actions that China is taking that are to be read in this context, the fact that they want to insulate their economy. Now, whether that is only because of a potential conflict over Taiwan, I don't think so. I think this is a long-term plan which dates back at least 10 years since the first Trump administration, when China started to see, of course, that, initially there was a trade war, then it started to be all-encompassing sort of like tech and military competition between the US and China. And so I think that, at the time, Xi Jinping and the CCP thought it could be a good idea anyway to insulate their own economy. He also launched, Xi Jinping, several plans like dual circulation to sort of like make the world more dependent on China, but make, China more autarkic, more self-sufficient. So I think it's not just because of a potential conflict over Taiwan, but I do think that these measures that they implemented in the past decade, of course, have for the CCP a double benefit of also helping the country in case they ever would decide to really attack Taiwan. Of course, that's also really dependent, in my opinion, on a variety of more pragmatic considerations, such as the fact that the state of the economy in China is not particularly good at the moment, that we got youth unemployment, that you have a real estate crisis, and of course that the geopolitical situation with the United States, despite Trump being friendly to Xi Jinping, is actually quite tense, right? That being said, of course, these are pragmatic considerations which should lead us to think that, Xi Jinping would not want to start a war under, uncertain conditions, also of not knowing whether other countries in the region will interfere. But I'm afraid that sometimes these kind of decisions in autocratic regime do not only depend on, practical decision and pragmatic ones, but also very much on ideology. And unfortunately, in that case, of course, the situation is much more difficult and tense to predict.
Andrew, when I read it up on this story, you often see this term shield of chips, or, shield of semiconductors that Taiwan has, meaning because they have these super important chips for AI, that kind of offers them a shield of protection. But now TSMC, they start building factories in other places, in the US, in Germany. Isn't that taking away this kind of protection that the semiconductors used to offer Taiwan?
It is true that people are seeing this, contradiction. In one hand, we do need to, we are benefits from the silicon shield. Because we got all the semiconductor factories in Taiwan, in Hsinchu, which is known as the Silicon Valley in Taiwan. Because of that, we're safe. We're safer because the war tried to protect us, because we got all those important chips, especially under this AI era. But when we see this kind of AI competition right now, is boosting, it's also important to really just back to the diversify of supply chain. When we build up semiconductors factories in Arizona, in the US, or the ESMC they built up in Germany and or in Japan, I think they are trying to do more business to these friendly partners of Taiwan, right? We try to do more business to America, try to do more business to Europe, and try to do more business to Japan, because these countries, at least they won't try to invade Taiwan, and it's safer and it's so diversifying. So back to the questions we've talked about, China was, half of our ICs are exported to China. But we really, I think the Taiwanese government really trying to decrease this kind of reliance. And by building up all these different fabs in our, friendly allies, friendly partners, it's also part of the way to, getting rid of this kind of red supply chain. But also it does raise some kind of skepticism, especially in Taiwan in the past few years, not right now especially, but, the opposition party leaders, they are trying to, they're criticizing the ruling party for allowing TSMC to build up fabs, build up factories outside Taiwan, because it's going to break the silicon shield. But I think meanwhile, everybody knows that, Taiwanese government is under pressure. And if we want security commitment from these partners, this semiconductor is the leverage. So I think this kind of collaboration, it might seems contradictory, but also it's trying to do both. Maybe it's a safer bet, right? Because in doing so, we can diversify the supply chain, and in doing so, really, if the war happened, it's actually safer for the war, because if things really, turns out really bad, we can still, our allies, our partners can still get these chips. And I think it does seem contradictory, but I think what the Taiwanese government, I assume they're trying to do both, because doing both is the safest way to, compared to just bet on the, either one of the options.
Simona,
and very briefly, if I may interject, I think, Andrew is right, because first of all, what can you do? Can you, as a Taiwanese government, reliant on defensive measures from partners like the United States, tell Donald Trump we're not going to build this plant? It started already with Biden. And also, I think very briefly, I think the hope for Taiwan really is, and I think that's something that they're trying to do. They are so good. They have mastered, the fabs in a way that they can always be faster in producing the smaller nanometers, right? So the next generation, hopefully, will always be in Taiwan. And that's something that still continues to, in my opinion, protect Taiwan, because the capabilities that you need, and especially for AI and military purposes, you need the really small chips. And this is something that Taiwan, of course, still has the best capacity in the world to produce in Taiwan.
Yeah, I appreciate you both getting a bit into the details with us here. But I know that you've both been quite generous with your time so far. So just one final question for both of you. Simona, it seems like, when we zoom out here, that other countries call the shots, and then Europe pays an outsized price. And I can't help but wonder, is Europe unprepared, punching above its weight, too dependent on other countries? What's the right way for us here in Europe to think about these things?
I think it's difficult, because the European Union was conceived as not as a security, of course, union, but as an economic one, right? And now we are struggling to adapt to a new geopolitical phase in which you cannot detach economic relationship from geopolitical concerns. So that's something that requires a lot of, understanding, a lot of strategizing, and it's increasingly difficult when you have 27 different voices. Some of them are pro-China. Look at Hungary. Now it's changing with the new government. But under, of course, Orban, that's what it was. Cyprus, which routinely, of course, also vetoes, excuse me, any kind of, measure speaking about Taiwan. So I think what's the best option is really to continue to engage with Taiwan. Political process, in the sense that this is not something that in the EU we are actually used to doing, right? To talk about security concerns.
Andrew, from where you're sitting, looking at the European Union, what would you kind of wish from us that we could do, we should do, to give you some more security in this relationship?
I think doing business is a good way, right? Because I think in the past, not even anything political, if you try to make a big deal with Taiwanese government, any kind of details, any kind of, by calling Taiwan as Taiwan, might make Beijing angry. And I think many of the business leaders or politicians might be, they try to avoid any kind of this kind of harassments from China, or like they don't want China's to make this into a story, make this into a big deal. So they just don't. Okay, maybe not touching Taiwan, but I think now we've seen many Taiwanese corporations, especially because of the semiconductor. We've seen Taiwanese companies are showing how robust they are, their supply chain, and what they can offer, what Taiwan can offer, and what they are willing to do, what they are willing to collaborate with European countries. So I think by considering Taiwan as a nice business partner, because it really is, especially on high tech, building up business collaboration is also a way to, not only good for Taiwan, it's also good for the European Union, right? Because we see the supply chain when it comes to you have a supplier from China, you have a supplier friendly to China. There are so many geopolitical risk, but also political risk from Beijing. If they are saying something, they're trying to influence your decisions. It's all happening really fast. But I think by doing business with Taiwan, and I think what Taiwan is showing that they are reliable and they are friendly to the world.
Well, we wanted to get into the nitty gritty here and look at how this tension that we just heard about, how it might affect an industry that's really, really important here in Germany,
For Germans.
which is, of course, the automotive sector, right? And to do that, we're actually joined by Beatrix Keim from the Center for Automotive Research, also known as CAR. Beatrix, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Cassandra. Hi, Kai. Thanks for asking me to join.
Beatrix, give us a quick wrap. Like, how deeply integrated is the European car industry or the German car industry into this Asian region, China, Taiwan?
Well, on one hand side, it's of course from export side, it is integrated very, very deeply. Not only from the car side, I mean, that import into China especially fell, of course, in the recent years, which for all the manufacturers, but for any kind of industry which is very deep and very, very, very warm to Germany, it's like machinery, chemistry, pharmaceuticals, it is very much involved. And that includes, of course, Taiwan, small things like the very famous chips and semiconductors, even small things, the nitty-gritty ones like screws. There is a lot of import or exchange happening between the EU, especially Germany, and Taiwan. So both China and Taiwan are very, very important for the overall export-import statistics of Germany.
When we're talking about a potential, currently hypothetical conflict between China and Taiwan, what is the main strategy for businesses to deal with any potential conflict? How are they planning?
Well, I think these are scenarios which are a little bit more far away, because at current point of time, everybody is just dipping into these volatility, especially coming from the US. But of course, the conflict situation between China and Taiwan is always there on the plate as well. So on one hand side, it is something like not only a China plus one, a Taiwan plus one, meaning that you differentiate and make a bit more diverging cases for your suppliers, that you're looking into what do I need to get from China, what is really necessary and cannot be sourced somewhere else. Same for Taiwan. Or can I ask the manufacturers, now talking more about the Taiwanese ones, to perhaps have their production capacities not in China, but then perhaps in Vietnam, in Thailand, so in other countries, or Romania, Poland, Hungary, countries which are either closer and or cheaper than a production in Europe, but to really diversify more the sourcing in this way, not to delete completely and to completely cut the ties to Taiwan suppliers, but to ask them perhaps to have some other production sites available as well. And of course, to look into other suppliers, to source for new suppliers who are supplying the same material in similar or even perhaps better quality. Of course, they need to then balance the cost as well, but that is definitely to have not all eggs in one basket, but really diversify on a global level.
A question about like hard truth, or maybe you could say some tough love. Who is more important to the German car industry? Is it China or is it Taiwan?
China, definitely China. From both sides, it is on one hand side of course what is produced in China. There is of course still a lot of profit made, a lot of reinvestment into the production and R&D facilities, or research and development facilities in China. And if you talk not only about the manufacturers, but of course the whole automotive industries, like the supplier industry, there is a lot going on. And a lot of the suppliers, especially the German suppliers, if you talk about tier one like Bosch, Continental, ZF, or hidden champions, there are some who are more in even more in the black mass for battery cells, this grinders. They're actually coming from Germany, and they are very deeply involved in the supply chain in China, not only to the German manufacturers, but as well to the Chinese manufacturers. And as on Taiwan, there is only an import car industry, and of course, some screws and the chips and so on. But even that can be sourced somewhere else. So it is definitely for sales and for sourcing, it is China.
There was a huge alert last year, I want to say. So chip production, chip manufacturing stopped in the Netherlands from a Chinese company, and all the German manufacturers, car manufacturers, were like, "Oh, we probably need to halt production as well because we don't have any chips anymore." Have the companies learned since then? Because there was the same conversation going on about diversifying supply chains after COVID. Then 2025 happened, again, not so diversified. Are German car manufacturers diversifying or completely focusing on China?
No. They're of course diversifying, especially just after last year, where that was an Xperia was in the Netherlands and they are refining then the materials in China, and this was then there was a whole diplomatic thing going on. Yes, of course. So the sourcing departments of the three big OEMs, and just as well from Stellantis and Renault, were then traveling through the world. And of course, in Korea, in Japan, Taiwan, there are suppliers as well, and they are diversifying as well to have now plants somewhere else. And it's of course which kind of chips. So the Xperia chip, for example, it's called discrete chip, which lets you think that it is a very complicated one. Actually, it's just the other way around. This chip is a very, very simple one. So for simple things like opening with your key the car. But the real chips, the very complex chips and semiconductors, which are required for the software-defined vehicle functionings, so for more connectivity, going up into autonomous driving, these are different chips, and they are more, coming from Taiwan and from Korea or from NVIDIA. And of course, it depends where they are. So, of course, on one hand side, it is where do I source these chips, and where are the manufacturer of these chips are putting the plants. And I think they are, of course, now diversifying as well to have scenarios worked out. What could happen where, in which geopolitical situation could we be involved, and where are more safe and secure spaces, including any kind of tariff frenzies from our Rose Garden friend.
Beatrix, you spent years in China yourself, not asking you to look into a crystal ball or predict the future or anything, but from your vantage point, do you think that President Xi could seriously invade Taiwan during his term?
Yes.
What makes you think that?
So number one, when he got into power back in 2012, he had that already in the thoughts, which are now part of the Chinese legislation, so the Xi Jinping thoughts. There is the program of the China Dream, which was especially then in 2012 rolled out all over China with this little girl being a little bit more traditional, but there was already the one country, two systems was already as a program point in. It's repeated in every 5-year plan, in every appropriate regulation or a program as well, directive. It's always in wherever it is required, even if you check the documents for the 15th 5-year plan, which is now in place for 26 until 2030. It's always the one country, two nations that needs to be achieved at any point of time. Of course, China is very aware that Taiwan is an economical powerhouse, and the exports from Taiwan to China are, especially in the semiconductor area. So that would, of course, be kind of a home run to stay in the picture. But on the other side, yeah, it's the political tensions. On the other side, it is at current point of time, China is in the inner country, the inner market, the interior consume is low. It's chaotic. It's everything is on a decline. To the outside, nobody really sees that, but the economic situation is not that good, so to say it a little bit more nicely. So what does Xi Jinping need actually for to gain that trust that he is not only a dear leader, but that he is a capable leader? This is, for example, to really deliver against his promises. So to bring China up to speed and to bring China into a technology advantage, to really reach the top, for example, as a car manufacturer with the leading technology. All of these things which come back from the Made in China 25 policy. These have more or less, been ticked or are on a good way to be achieved. But it's that one point. And you might remember there was this picture with Taiwan and the Spratly Islands and some other islands with the dotted lines, which you usually have for the sea, the sea boundaries. And there was then this Bushao Ividyar, so not one single dot less, and that included Taiwan. That was like 5 to 10 years ago that it was really, spread throughout the social media in China, and to really make all the people aware that the China dream is not only a nation's dream, it's the dream of every single Chinese person, and that includes for them Taiwan. So would it be wise to go ahead? No. Is that something he needs to deliver against? Yes, but he has still time. He is president for life. So, and he's just turning in, what is today? It's the 11, in 4 days, he's turning 73. He looks good. So there is sufficient time to still deliver against it.
Kai, there was so much that we could have kept talking about in those conversations, both with Beatrix, but then also with Andrew and Simona. But the thing that really jumps out at me when I kind of zoom out on these conversations, right, is I can't help but wonder if Europe is just delaying making hard choices. We saw this especially on the German side for a long time when it came to energy, or like what kind of investments were going to be made in electric vehicles, in the auto sector. So maybe I'm a bit primed to see it, but I'm just wondering, is Europe putting its head in the sand?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what Andrew was talking about a lot, right? So Taiwan trying to develop relationships with Europe, but there is 27 countries that you need to talk to, and nobody really speaks with one voice. And that makes it super hard for them, you know, to move away from China and be like, hey, we have these new countries that we can trade with. And that's the thing that also the EU wasn't constructed for this. It's not like a security alliance, it's a trading alliance. But even on trade, we are like, we cannot really agree what we want.
No, it's really hard to know where the block is moving. It's not even like moving one big ship, which you have to turn quite slowly. It's like moving many big ships and then some small ships, and everybody wants to do their own thing. Another thing that shocked me was what Andrew was saying about trade with China, that actually Taiwan, despite having such a difficult relationship with China, that there's so much trade going across the border.
Yeah, I mean, I guess history, right? So it's a really it's really close to Taiwan and it's easy to trade with them.
True.
And probably it's a really easy opportunity to make money. But obviously when relationships like that turn sour, it's hard for businesses to give up on this kind of money-making machine.
These easy euros, dollars, pick your currency, right? To pick those low-hanging fruit, it's hard to resist that, so to speak. And I don't know, Beatrix at the end was saying, and she knows more than me, and so maybe I'm delulu or complacent or ignorant, but I have a really hard time. I would be really shocked if we were actually talking about a kinetic conflict, like a war between China and Taiwan next year or the year afterwards. But again, maybe I'm just a bourgeoisie. I've had my feet up too long and I'm not there on the ground.
Yeah, I don't think, like, when you read what the commentators are saying, all-out war is like the least likely thing to happen, basically. But obviously it's step by step and taking away bits and pieces here and there, weaponizing the economic relationship by saying, okay, we don't trade with you anymore, and suddenly you don't, a lot of businesses don't make money anymore in Taiwan, but if you want the money, you need to work with us or be one nation again.
But like what Andrew was saying too about like a carrot and a stick, a carrot looks a lot tastier when the stick looks a lot bigger. So maybe that's just like part of the strategy. If it seems like a kinetic war is more possible, maybe a different kind of negotiation from the Chinese side becomes more appetizing to the Taiwanese side.
Yeah, obviously. Sure. I mean, you don't want war. You want to keep the peace, right? But yeah, it's always hard to argue against the numbers, as Beatrix was saying. You know, for the car industry, China is just more important, full stop. So there is not going to be a lot happening from Germany to push for a bigger relationship with Taiwan, is like what I'm expecting. I would much rather see like the US doing a lot more, because these semiconductor chips that TSMC is producing, they are like sending them to NVIDIA, to AMD, because these are the companies that design them and TSMC manufactures them. And as of right now, the AI boom is holding up the whole economy in the US. And if that goes away, Donald Trump is going to have a lot more problems, you know, than just, the
problems he's created for himself already, possibly, allegedly.
Yeah.
And that's it this week for us on The Dip.
Unfortunately. But if you have any comments you want to leave, do it wherever you're listening to this podcast, either on Spotify or if you're watching on YouTube.
That's right. And of course, shoot us an email if you like good old-fashioned email, or if you have a lot to say. You can do that by shooting us an email at thedip@dw.com, because of course we love getting your messages all the time.
Until next time, and thanks for watching The Dip!
Bye!